The night the rain chose her. The storm that night wasn't just another storm. It was a test, a curtain of cold water draping over the city as if heaven itself had grown tired of mercy. The streets were mirrors of chaos, cars half submerged, alleys glistening like dark veins, the city reduced to a trembling heartbeat beneath the endless roar of thunder. Arya had never liked storms. They reminded her of every memory she tried to bury, of the night her mother died in a hospital bed, of the sound of sirens when her father never came home, of every goodbye that had taught her the world did not owe kindness. And yet that night, as she hurried home from her late shift at the diner, something inside her refused to take shelter, something restless, something that told her the rain had come for a reason. She pulled her thin coat tighter, the fabric already heavy with water, her boots sloshing through puddles that reached her ankles. The streets were deserted, storefronts dark, only the buzz of a flickering streetlight keeping her company. She should have been afraid. This part of the city was no place for a woman alone at midnight, but fear was a luxury she had learned to live without. When you've already lost everything, the world can't threaten much more. She quickened her pace, glancing toward the distant glow of her apartment building. Just a few more blocks, she told herself. A few more steps to warmth, to silence, to safety. Then she heard it, a sound barely cutting through the rain, fragile but unmistakable. A moan, a sound of pain. It came from the narrow alley to her left, swallowed by shadows and flickering light. Her steps froze. Every instinct screamed to keep walking, to pretend she hadn't heard. But there it was again, a muffled groan, desperate and human. Her heart twisted, her pulse quickened, and before her mind could argue, her feet turned toward the darkness. The alley reeked of rust and damp concrete. Trash cans overflowed, graffiti-covered walls closing in like ribs around a wounded heart. And there, near the dumpster, she saw him. A man sprawled in the gutter, motionless except for the faint rise of his chest. The water around him was tinted red, and that single color against the gray storm rooted her in place. Blood. Fresh and real. Her throat went dry. She looked around, half expecting to see others, but the world had gone still, as if the storm itself was watching. He was tall, his dark clothes torn and soaked through, one arm clutching his abdomen where the blood pooled deepest. She could see the glint of something metallic near his hand. No, not a weapon, just a silver chain tangled around his fingers. She hesitated, her breath coming in clouds, her mind a war between fear and compassion. She had grown up in this city. She knew its whispers. Men like this didn't just end up bleeding in alleys by accident. This was no mugging. This was a message from the kind of people whose names were never spoken out loud. And yet, as lightning flashed, she saw his face, pale, young, handsome even through the grime. He looked lost, broken, human. Against all reason, she stepped closer. "Hey, can you hear me?" Her voice trembled, swallowed by the rain. No answer. Only a shallow breath that rasped through his parted lips. She crouched beside him, her knees sinking into the cold water, her trembling hands hovering over the wound. "Oh my God!" The gash was deep, too deep. He needed a hospital. But if she called one, the police would come. And men who ended up like this didn't want police. She'd seen enough from her years working nights at the diner, listening to the wrong conversations, watching money exchange hands in envelopes. She knew that kind of danger didn't disappear. It only changed faces. Her mind screamed no, but her heart moved first. She pressed her scarf to the wound, feeling the warmth of his blood seep through the fabric and into her skin. His eyes fluttered open for a heartbeat, dark, piercing eyes that burned even through pain. He looked straight at her as if memorizing her face and then whispered a single word through cracked lips. "Run!" The word hung in the air between thunderclaps carried by the rain. It wasn't a plea. It was a warning. But she couldn't leave him. She refused to. "I can't," she whispered back, her voice breaking. "I can't just leave you here." Gathering strength she didn't know she possessed, she hooked her arms under his shoulders and heaved. He was heavy, his body limp, his blood painting her hands. Step by step, inch by inch, she dragged him out of the alley and toward the faint glow of her apartment at the corner. Every muscle screamed. Every gust of wind pushed her backward, but she didn't stop. It was madness. It was reckless. But something deeper guided her. The quiet certainty that this moment would change everything. By the time she reached her door, she was shaking, soaked to the bone. Her key slipped twice before the lock gave way and she stumbled inside, pulling him with her. The door slammed shut behind them, shutting out the storm, but not her fear. The tiny apartment smelled of old wood and coffee grounds. She eased him onto the worn couch, rushing to the kitchen for towels, bandages, anything. Her trembling hands worked on instinct, pressing, tying, cleaning, her years of taking care of her sick mother flooding back in painful flashes. The blood kept coming, and with every heartbeat she feared she was losing him. Hours blurred together in the dim light. She stitched him up as best she could with trembling fingers, wiped the rain and blood from his face, and finally wrapped him in the only blanket she had left. His breathing steadied, barely, but it was enough to make her chest unclench. Exhaustion dragged at her, but she couldn't look away. Who was this man? What world did he come from? The faint tattoo near his collarbone, the scar on his knuckles, the silver chain clenched in his fist, they all whispered of violence and secrets. And yet, lying there, he looked so fragile that she found herself whispering a silent prayer for him, something she hadn't done in years. When dawn came, pale light crept through the blinds, painting the room in gold and gray. Arya sat slumped in a chair, half asleep, her head heavy against the wall. She stirred when she felt the silence. No sound of rain, no labored breathing. Her eyes snapped open. The couch was empty. Blankets crumpled, blood stains dark against the fabric, but the man was gone. She shot to her feet, heart pounding. The door was locked, the window still shut. It made no sense. He had vanished, leaving only the faint scent of cologne and a streak of blood leading to the door. A chill ran through her as she traced the mark with her fingertips. Whoever he was, he had walked out without a word. She tried to convince herself it was over. She had done her part. She had saved a life. Whatever danger surrounded him, it would pass her by. But as she cleaned the mess, scrubbing away the blood until her hands ached, unease gnawed at her chest. Her phone buzzed with a missed call, an unknown number. She deleted it without listening. The rest of the morning passed in restless silence until the knock came. It wasn't the casual tap of a neighbor or the impatient pounding of a delivery man. It was heavy, deliberate, 3 measured strikes that seemed to echo inside her bones. Arya froze, cloth still in her hand. Another knock, louder this time, followed by a pause, a silence so thick she could hear her own pulse. Fear coiled in her stomach. No one knew what she had done. No one could. And yet someone was at her door. She hesitated before whispering, "Who's there?" Her voice barely rose above a whisper. The answer came in a voice that was deep, calm, and dangerous in its control. "Open the door!" It wasn't a request. It was an order. She stepped back, staring at the door like it might explode open. Her instinct screamed no, but something in the tone, steady, unyielding, drew her forward. Her fingers trembled on the lock. With a click, the latch turned, and the door swung open. He stood there, a man built like a shadow-given form. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit that looked wrong against the shabby hallway. His dark hair was slicked back, droplets of rain clinging to the edges. Behind him, 2 other men in matching suits lingered, their gazes sharp, their stances too practiced. But her eyes locked on the one in front. His presence filled the doorway, commanding without words, his gaze so intense it felt like a weight pressing against her chest. He didn't speak right away. He just looked at her, studying her face with quiet precision. "Where is he?" The question was low, controlled, and somehow colder than the storm outside. Arya blinked. I don't know what you mean." The man's lips twitched, not quite a smile, more like the ghost of one. "Don't lie to me." His eyes flicked past her, landing on the corner of the room where the rug was still damp with the faint trace of blood. "You brought him here last night. He was dying." The words hit like a blade. "How did he know?" "I don't know who you're talking about," she managed to whisper, clutching the doorframe for balance. He stepped forward and the air seemed to tighten. "His blood is on your hands." he said softly, almost like an accusation wrapped in gratitude. And that means you're part of this now. She backed away, her breath uneven. I only helped him because he was hurt. I didn't ask for any of this. His gaze didn't waver. No one ever does. His tone held neither threat nor comfort, just truth, raw and absolute. You saved my brother's life, he said finally, and for that you've earned protection and danger in equal measure. Arya stared, words caught in her throat. Your brother? He nodded once. He was attacked last night. You found him before my men did. If you hadn't... His voice trailed off, but the unspoken conclusion hung heavy. She swallowed hard, her thoughts spinning. Mafia. It didn't need to be said. The way his men stood, the way his words dripped with quiet authority, it was written all over him. Who are you? She asked. Call me Luca, he said simply. The name rolled like thunder. And from this moment, Arya, you're under my protection. Whether you like it or not, she shook her head, panic rising. I don't need protection. I just want my life back. Luca studied her in silence, then glanced toward the window. Outside, across the street, a black car sat idle. Two men inside pretending to smoke, but their eyes were fixed on her building. It's too late for that, he said quietly. You saved him. They'll come for you now. She turned pale. Who will? The ones who put him in that alley. My enemies. They don't leave witnesses. The world tilted around her. She wanted to deny it, to laugh, to call it madness. But the fear in Luca's eyes was real, the kind that only men who had seen death up close could wear. I can't stay, she whispered. You can't stay, he agreed. Pack your things. What? You're coming with me. No, I don't even know you. His expression softened for the first time, though the steel in his voice remained. You don't have to. You just have to trust that I won't let you die. She stared at him, her heart pounding, torn between disbelief and the instinct to survive. Outside, thunder rolled again, distant but familiar, as if the storm hadn't really ended. It had just moved inside her. Without another word, she turned and grabbed her small duffel from the closet, stuffing it with what little she owned. When she looked back, Luca was still there, watching her with unreadable eyes. You have 5 minutes, he said. After that, they'll be here. As she followed him down the stairwell, flanked by silent men in suits, Arya realized how quickly a life could shatter. 12 hours ago, she had been a waitress walking home in the rain. Now she was stepping into black SUVs, guarded by strangers whose very presence made the air feel heavier. The car door shut behind her with a solid thud, sealing her fate. As the convoy pulled away from the curb, rain began to fall again, softer this time, almost like a whisper against the glass. Arya watched her apartment disappear in the rearview mirror, the familiar world dissolving into shadows. She didn't know where they were taking her or what waited ahead, but one truth settled deep in her chest. She had saved a stranger, and in doing so, had rewritten her destiny. Somewhere between fear and fate, the rain had chosen her. The debt of blood and kindness. The car glided through the city like a shadow, the hum of its engine low and smooth, a beast disguised in silence. Arya sat pressed against the cold leather seat, watching the city blur past, streetlights melting into gold streaks, raindrops sliding down the tinted glass like forgotten tears. Every turn took her farther from the world she knew, from her little apartment, from the safety of routine. The silence inside the car was heavier than the storm outside, broken only by the rhythm of rain and the quiet sound of Luca's measured breathing. He sat beside her, composed, unreadable, his sharp profile illuminated by flashes of passing light. There was something unsettling about how calm he was, like a man accustomed to chaos, who had learned to master storms instead of avoiding them. Arya's fingers twisted nervously in her lap, her mind still trying to make sense of everything. 12 hours ago, she had been serving coffee to night shift workers and drunk strangers. Now she was sitting next to a man who exuded power so effortlessly that even his silence felt dangerous. She wanted to ask questions, to demand answers, but the words stuck in her throat. It wasn't fear of him exactly. It was the strange gravity he carried, the kind that told her truth from his lips might change her life even more than it already had. Luca finally spoke without looking at her. "You're trembling." His voice was calm, deep, smooth, like velvet laid over steel. She blinked, realizing she was. "It's cold," she lied. His gaze shifted toward her, those dark eyes reading her like an open book. "It's fear," he corrected softly, not unkindly. She looked away, embarrassed, staring at the wet city lights. "You can still drop me off," she said, her tone half plea, half defiance. "I don't need protection. I'll disappear. No one will ever know what happened." He studied her for a long moment before answering. "You think this is about what you want?" he said, voice low but steady. "Last night you stepped into a world that doesn't forget. You saved my brother's life. That makes you visible, to me, to my enemies. Disappearing isn't an option anymore." His words sank into her like stones sinking into deep water. She wanted to hate him for his certainty, but deep down she knew he was right. That feeling she had when he knocked on her door, the sense that something irreversible had begun, wasn't wrong. It was destiny, unfolding quietly like the next chapter of a book she hadn't meant to open. The car finally slowed, turning off the main road and into a narrow lane lined with tall cypress trees that bent and whispered in the wind. At the end of the path stood a wrought iron gate, its intricate design gleaming under the rain. It opened automatically as they approached, revealing a sprawling estate beyond. Stone walls, ivy-covered arches, a grand house that looked like it had been built not just to live in, but to command. It wasn't the kind of mansion seen in magazines. It was older, heavier, something that carried history and secrets, the kind of place where whispers echoed longer than laughter. When the car stopped beneath the shelter of a portico, Luca stepped out first. Two men approached from the shadows, one opening the door for her, the other taking her bag. She hesitated before stepping out, her boots touching the marble steps that gleamed with rain. The air smelled of pine and wet stone. The silence here was different, controlled, almost sacred. Luca turned toward her, his coat glistening with rain. "You'll be safe here," he said simply. "For now." She followed him inside, and the warmth hit her like a wave. The entrance hall was vast, lit by chandeliers that shimmered like captured starlight. Paintings adorned the walls, portraits of people whose eyes seemed to follow her, people who probably shared the same dark bloodline. The floor was black marble veined with silver, every step echoing softly. She felt out of place immediately, her soaked clothes clinging to her skin, her heart hammering like an intruder caught in someone else's dream. Luca gestured toward one of the maids standing silently nearby. "Get her something dry to wear," he said, and his voice carried the kind of authority that needed no volume. The maid nodded and disappeared down a corridor. Arya found herself glancing at him, curious despite her fear. "You said he was your brother," she began quietly. "The man I found." Luca's expression flickered just slightly. "Matteo," he said after a pause. "My younger brother. He's reckless. He believes in mercy, in a world that eats mercy alive." There was a hint of sadness in his tone, quickly buried under control. "He shouldn't have been alone that night." "What happened to him?" she asked. Luca's eyes darkened. "He trusted the wrong people. I'll deal with them." The finality in his words made her shiver. She didn't ask more. Some answers were better left unspoken. The maid returned with a bundle of clean clothes and led Arya to a guest room down a long hallway. It was bigger than her entire apartment. Soft cream walls, a fireplace flickering in the corner, windows overlooking a courtyard that shimmered with raindrops. She changed into the clothes they gave her, simple but warm, and for the first time in hours, her body stopped trembling. Still, her mind wouldn't rest. She sat by the window, watching the rain trace lines down the glass, wondering what kind of fate she had stumbled into. A knock came. She turned to see Luca standing at the door, now without his coat, sleeves rolled, his presence less formal but no less commanding. "May I come in?" he asked. She nodded. He stepped inside, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on her. "You haven't eaten," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm not hungry," she murmured. You need your strength, he replied. Fear burns through it faster than hunger ever could. The words caught her off guard, gentle but heavy with understanding. He walked closer, stopping near the fireplace. The flames danced against his expression, revealing the faint weariness behind his composure. You did a brave thing last night, Arya. Most people would have left him there. I almost did, she admitted, her voice small. But something told me I couldn't. It felt wrong to walk away, he nodded slowly. That voice inside you, the one that tells you what's right even when it's dangerous, don't silence it. The world tries to kill it early in people. That's why there are so few like you left. The compliment stunned her. She wasn't used to being seen that way. You talk like you've seen a lot of people lose it, she said softly. His jaw tightened. I have. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of fire. There was something about the quiet that wasn't awkward. It was heavy with meaning, two strangers sharing the same haunted air. After a moment, Luca turned toward her again. There's something you need to understand. The men who attacked my brother, they won't stop just because he's alive. They'll look for anyone connected to him. That includes you now. Arya's stomach sank. But I didn't do anything wrong. No, he said. But you did something rare. You cared. And in my world, caring makes you vulnerable. He spoke not like a man boasting of danger, but as someone burdened by it. She saw a flicker of loneliness in him, a kind of isolation that came from living behind walls built not of stone, but of necessity. I don't want to be part of your world, she said quietly. Neither did I, he answered without hesitation. That truth spoken so plainly left her speechless. Then why stay in it? She asked finally. He looked at her then, truly looked, as if deciding whether to tell her a secret. Because sometimes the world you hate is the only one that listens when you fight back. They didn't speak after that. The fire burned low, the storm easing into silence. When he finally left the room, Arya lay awake long after, replaying his words. She didn't know what kind of man Luca truly was, criminal or protector, savior or monster, but she sensed something deeper beneath his calm. A wound that mirrored her own. Days passed in uneasy rhythm. She was given freedom to move within the estate, but there was nowhere to go. Guards patrolled the grounds, the gates remained locked, and every corridor hummed with secrets. Sometimes she saw Matteo, the man she had saved, being helped down the hallway by a doctor. He was pale but alive, his smile faint when their eyes met. You saved me, he whispered one morning when Luca wasn't there. I owe you my life. Arya shook her head. Just promise me you'll stay out of alleys next time. He laughed softly, a sound that carried both gratitude and sorrow. In our world, he said, alleys find you. That evening, as twilight settled, Arya stood by the balcony overlooking the city lights in the distance. The rain had finally stopped and the air was sharp and clean. For the first time since the night of the storm, she let herself breathe. But her peace shattered when she saw movement near the outer gate. A car parked where it shouldn't be, headlights off, silhouettes inside. Her heartbeat quickened. A shadow detached from the car and moved toward the trees. It wasn't one of Luca's men. She could feel it. Without thinking, she turned and ran through the hallways, her bare feet whispering against marble floors until she found Luca in his study. There's someone outside, she said breathlessly, near the gate. He was on his feet before she finished. Where? She led him to the balcony, pointing toward the trees. The space was empty now, silent, but Luca's expression hardened. He motioned to one of his guards nearby, who spoke quickly into an earpiece. Within moments, men were moving through the property, flashlights cutting through darkness. Luca turned to her, his voice low but urgent. From now on, you don't go near the windows. Not alone. Do you understand? She nodded, the fear returning like a cold wave. What's happening? She whispered. It's already begun, he said grimly. The people who tried to kill Matteo, they've found you. Her knees almost gave way. Me? Why? Because they think you know more than you do. Because you helped him. Because kindness in their world looks like betrayal. Luca's men returned a few minutes later, reporting the intruders gone. But he didn't relax. He stood by the window staring into the rain, his jaw set. "You shouldn't have to pay for what you did," he said quietly. "But this is what happens when good hearts cross paths with bad worlds." Arya watched him, something shifting inside her. "Then why do you stay in that world?" she asked again, softer this time. He turned toward her, eyes dark but honest. "Because someone has to protect what's left of the good." That night she couldn't sleep. She sat by the fire, staring into the flames, realizing how strange life could be. One act of compassion had bound her to a world she never wanted to see. Yet within it she found something she hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose. A spark that told her she was still capable of changing someone's fate, maybe even her own. As dawn crept in, Arya whispered to herself, maybe saving him wasn't a mistake after all. Outside, the rain stopped completely, and for the first time in a long time, the sky began to clear. Shadows at the gate. The mansion had become a strange sort of cage, beautiful, silent and full of secrets that breathed through its walls. Days melted into nights with the same rhythm of footsteps, the same echo of men guarding doors that led to places she wasn't allowed to see. Arya had learned the sounds of the house, the creak of the staircase when Luca descended at dawn, the steady hum of distant conversation behind closed study doors, the muffled click of Matteo's crutches as he walked the halls recovering from wounds that had nearly stolen his life. It should have felt suffocating, yet there was an odd safety in the routine. Each sunrise was proof that she had survived another night. And each night was a reminder that she was still in a world that wasn't hers but somehow depended on her. Choice that rainy evening, Luca had kept his promise. No one had come close since the night she'd seen the shadow. Near the gate, but she could tell from his demeanor that danger was not gone. He had grown quieter, sharper, his days consumed with meetings and phone calls spoken in languages she didn't understand. Once she had passed his office door when he was on a call, his tone calm but deadly. "No more mistakes," he had said softly, the kind of softness that made the air itself freeze. It wasn't anger. It was the discipline of a man used to being obeyed. Yet, when he saw her later in the hallway, his expression changed completely. The steel melted from his eyes, replaced by a guarded warmth that almost startled her. He didn't smile, not really, but something in the way he said her name, softly, carefully, felt like sunlight cutting through storm clouds. She tried to keep her distance at first, reminding herself that he was not the kind of man ordinary people befriended. But kindness is a stubborn thing. It grows even in hostile soil. Matteo, too, had started to recover faster, often sitting in the sunroom with her, teaching her bits of Italian words between laughter that felt foreign yet familiar. He had the same dark eyes as Luca, but without the shadows. "You make my brother smile," Matteo teased one afternoon, his grin mischievous. Arya flushed, shaking her head. "I don't think your brother knows how to smile," Matteo chuckled. "He used to. Before our father died, before the world turned into numbers, debts, and bloodlines. You remind him there's still something else beyond all this." His words lingered in her mind long after he left the room. That night, she stood by the balcony again, staring out at the gardens below. The moon hung low, spilling silver across the stones. She could hear the faint voices of guards patrolling, the quiet rhythm of footsteps, constant, vigilant. The peace felt fragile, as if the night itself was holding its breath. When she turned to go back inside, she found Luca standing at the doorway watching her. He was dressed simply, no jacket, his shirt sleeves rolled up. But there was something in his posture, strong, unyielding, that made the space between them hum with tension. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said quietly, walking closer. "It's late." "I can't sleep," she replied, folding her arms. "It's too quiet. I keep thinking about what you said, that they'll come for me." His jaw tightened slightly, his gaze drifting toward the garden. "They will try. People like them don't forget loose ends." "Then why are you so calm?" she asked, almost accusingly. "You talk like death is just another appointment on your schedule." He looked at her, and for the first time his composure cracked. Just a flicker, a hint of something weary and human. "Because when you've lived with danger long enough, you learn to stop fearing it. Fear wastes time, and time is the one thing we can't buy back. She stared at him, the depth of his words sinking in. You talk like someone who's already lost too much. He didn't answer immediately. When he finally did, his voice was quieter, rougher. I lost my father to betrayal, my mother to grief, and my brother nearly to the same mistakes I keep repeating. So, yes, I've lost enough to know what fear costs. He turned to leave, then stopped. You saved Mateo. That means you saved the last piece of my family I still care about. I can't undo what you've walked into, but I can make sure you come out alive. The simplicity of his promise carried more weight than any oath. She nodded, unable to speak, her heart pounding with something that wasn't quite fear anymore. After he left, she lay awake thinking of the way his voice had softened, the way his eyes had momentarily lost their armor. It was strange how easily strength and sorrow coexisted in him, like two halves of the same broken soul. Morning came with a golden haze spilling over the horizon. For the first time in weeks, the mansion felt alive again. Mateo walked without help, smiling as he joined her in the kitchen. The staff moved with less tension, laughter echoing faintly through the halls. Arya allowed herself to breathe, even to smile, but the peace shattered by afternoon. It began with a sound, barely noticeable at first, like the distant hum of engines where none should be. Arya was in the library when she felt it, the faint vibration through the floor, followed by a subtle change in the air. The guards outside stiffened. One of them spoke into his earpiece sharply, his tone clipped. Within seconds, the calm dissolved into movement. Men rushed down hallways, doors closed with force, and the tension she had felt the first night returned full force. Luca appeared moments later, his face set, his voice all command. Arya, go to the east corridor. Stay with Mateo. Do not open the door for anyone but me. What's happening? She asked, standing up, her pulse racing. Trouble, he said, already moving. Stay low. She wanted to argue, to demand he explain, but his look stopped her cold. She turned and ran through the hallway, her heart pounding in her ears. The sound of engines grew louder, closer, and then she heard it. Tires screeching outside the gate, voices shouting in the distance, followed by the unmistakable crack of something breaking metal. Mateo was already waiting in the east corridor, leaning heavily on the wall, his face pale. They're here, he said quietly, his voice trembling. Before she could respond, a loud crash echoed from downstairs, the sound of splintering wood and chaos erupting all at once. The house that had been a fortress became a battleground. She flinched at every echo, clutching Mateo's arm, dragging him toward a side room hidden behind heavy curtains. We have to hide, she whispered urgently. He nodded, grimacing from pain. They slipped inside the narrow room, the darkness swallowing them whole. Minutes felt like hours. The sounds outside were muffled but terrifying. Shouting, hurried footsteps, the low growl of engines pulling away, followed by a silence so deep it made her ears ring. Then faintly a single voice cut through the stillness. Luca's. It's over, he said, his tone steady but tired. They won't try again soon. When Arya finally stepped out, her knees weak, she saw the aftermath in fragments. Shattered glass near the front gate, tire marks scorched into the gravel, and guards standing with grim expressions. Luca stood near the entrance, his shirt slightly torn, a faint bruise forming along his jaw, but his composure was intact. He looked like a man who had walked through fire and refused to burn. She rushed toward him before she could stop herself. Are you hurt? The question slipped out unbidden, her voice trembling. He turned to her, and for the first time she saw something rare in his expression. Concern, not for himself, but for her. You shouldn't have been out here, he said softly. I heard everything, she said, her throat tightening. They were trying to kill you, weren't they? He exhaled slowly, glancing toward the gates. They were trying to send a message. They failed, but what if they come back? She asked. They will, he said simply. And next time they won't knock. There was no bravado in his tone, only truth. She stared at him, the weight of his world pressing on her like a shadow that would never leave. You live like this every day? She asked. Yes, he said quietly. But you don't have to. The words hit harder than any bullet could. She realized what he meant. He was offering her a way out. "You mean I can leave?" she whispered. Luca nodded, his expression unreadable. "If you walk away now, I'll make sure no one ever finds you. You'll get a new name, a new place, a chance to start over. You saved my brother. You don't owe me anything." For a long moment, she couldn't answer. Freedom. The word hung in the air like a fragile promise. She could leave, go back to her quiet life, pretend the rainstorm had never happened. Yet when she looked into his eyes, she saw something deeper, something that wasn't command or power. It was the silent plea of a man who had protected others all his life, but never found someone who'd stay by choice. "I don't want to run anymore," she said finally, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "If I leave now, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what happened to you, to Matteo. Maybe I didn't choose this world, but maybe it chose me for a reason." For the first time since she had met him, Luca's expression softened completely. No armor, no mask, just quiet gratitude. "You're braver than most men I know," he said, "and far too kind for this life." "Maybe kindness is what your world needs," she replied, meeting his gaze. He smiled then, faint but real, a rare and fragile thing that made her chest ache. "Maybe you're right." The danger had not passed, but something had changed that night. For the first time, Luca allowed himself to hope that not everything good had to die in darkness, and Arya realized that sometimes fate doesn't wait for permission. It finds you in the rain and never lets go. The storm had come to claim something from both of them, but instead, it had forged an unspoken bond stronger than fear. As dawn rose, the mansion stood silent again, the scent of smoke fading into the morning light. Arya looked out at the horizon, her reflection shimmering faintly in the glass, and whispered to herself, "Maybe the storm didn't destroy me. Maybe it was trying to teach me how to survive." And somewhere behind her, in the quiet heart of the house, Luca watched her with a look that held both sorrow and respect, knowing that the next battle waiting for them wouldn't be fought with guns or power, but with trust, faith, and the fragile strength of the heart. The weight of trust. The days following the attack settled into a tense calm, the kind that never truly rests but lingers like a held breath. The estate no longer felt like a fortress of safety. It felt like a heart wrapped in steel, guarded but never at peace. Arya sensed the change in the air, conversations that stopped when she entered rooms, guards who carried their weapons more openly, Luca's late-night meetings that stretched until dawn. Something had shifted, and though the danger outside the walls had quieted, she could feel that the storm had only moved inward. Yet amid the uncertainty, she began to notice something else. The quiet respect the people in the house started to show her. The cook smiled when she passed, the guards nodded slightly. Matteo always greeted her like sunshine returning after rain. Even the house itself, with all its shadows and locked rooms, seemed to breathe easier when she walked through it. It wasn't that she held any power. It was that she carried something this place had forgotten: warmth. She spoke gently where others barked orders. She listened where others demanded answers, and slowly the atmosphere changed. Even Luca, who seemed carved from stone, had softened in ways he didn't acknowledge. He spent more time near her, sometimes joining her in the courtyard without reason, simply standing beside her while she tended the flowers that had been dying from neglect. The first time she caught him watching her hands move through the soil, he looked away quickly, as though embarrassed by the simplicity of the moment. But the next morning, she found a box of new seeds waiting on the bench with no note, only a quiet gesture that said more than words ever could. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills, Luca asked her to walk with him through the gardens. The air smelled of damp earth and rosemary, the paths glistening under the soft orange light. "You've changed this place," he said after a long silence. She looked at him confused. "How?" He glanced at the workers trimming the hedges, the maids chatting softly near the fountain. "Before you came, no one laughed here. No one spoke unless spoken to. This house lived in fear, not of enemies, but of me." He paused, his expression unreadable. "Now I hear laughter." I see them breathe again. I don't know if that's good or dangerous. It's good, she said firmly. Fear builds walls, but walls keep everyone out, even the people who care about you. He looked at her then, really looked, and for a moment, the weight in his eyes eased. You speak like someone who's never had to lead, he said softly. Maybe, she replied, or maybe like someone who's seen what fear does to good people. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that flickers before it disappears. You make it sound easy. It's not, she said, her voice low, but you make it harder than it has to be. They walked in silence for a while, the sound of their footsteps blending with the rustle of leaves. When they reached the fountain, he stopped, his gaze fixed on the water shimmering under the fading light. When my father died, he said quietly, this place became a kingdom built on debts and blood. I took control because if I hadn't, others would have turned it into chaos. I thought strength meant silence, distance, control. But Mateo, he still believed we could change. I thought he was naive. He looked at her again. Now I'm starting to wonder if I was the one who forgot how. Arya felt a swell of emotion at his words. It's not too late to remember, she whispered. He studied her face for a long moment, the silence stretching like a bridge between two broken worlds. Then he nodded once. Maybe you're right. That night, a decision took root in Luca's mind, small at first, fragile, but powerful. He began to change the way he led. Meetings that once ended with threats now ended with plans for negotiation. Old rivals received calls instead of warnings. Some of his men resisted, whispering that he was losing his edge, that compassion was weakness. But Arya saw it differently. Strength wasn't about control. It was about choice. And Luca was finally learning that lesson. Yet peace rarely comes without resistance. Mateo noticed the whispers before anyone else, hushed voices among the guards, messages that stopped when doors opened. One morning he found a letter slipped under his door, unsigned, only 3 words written in careful ink, "He will fall." He brought it straight to Luca, anger flashing in his dark eyes. Someone inside is feeding them information, Mateo said. Someone close. Luca's jaw tightened. Do you know who? Not yet, Mateo replied. But whoever it is, they don't want you changing the rules. For the first time in years, Luca felt something colder than fear, betrayal blooming from within. He doubled the guards, restricted access to the estate, and began quietly investigating. Arya noticed the tension in him grow again, the way his eyes scanned every room as if measuring trust in every face. One evening, she found him in his study, staring at an old photograph of his family. They want you to go back, she said gently. To be the man you were before. He didn't look up. They want a leader who kills before he speaks. They think peace is weakness. And what do you think? She asked. He looked at her then, his gaze heavy with truth. I think I finally found something worth fighting for that doesn't involve blood. Arya stepped closer, the firelight reflecting in her eyes. Then fight for that. Don't let fear steal what you've built. Luca's expression softened. You sound like Mateo. Maybe he's right, she said, smiling faintly. Or maybe you just needed someone to remind you that strength can look like kindness too. The next morning brought a quiet dread. Mateo didn't come to breakfast. Hours passed with no sign of him. When a guard finally entered the hall, his face was pale. He's gone, he said, voice shaking. Luca was on his feet instantly. Gone where? We found his car at the edge of the forest. The door open, the keys still inside. Arya's stomach turned to ice. He wouldn't just leave. Luca's expression hardened, his calm vanishing like smoke. No, he said quietly. He wouldn't. The house erupted into motion, men searching the grounds, phones ringing, orders shouted down hallways. Luca moved like a force of nature, his voice sharp but steady. Arya followed him, refusing to stay behind despite his command. Hours later, near dusk, they found signs. Tire tracks leading away from the property, traces of struggle near the road, and a piece of cloth torn from Mateo's jacket. Luca's hands clenched around it, his face unreadable. They've taken him, he said, the words flat but burning with restrained fury. Arya placed a trembling hand on his arm. What will you do? What I must, he replied, but not the way they expect. That night, the estate became a map of strategy and fear. Luca gathered his most trusted men, few in number but loyal. Arya stayed nearby listening, absorbing the gravity of his plan. He wouldn't launch a war. He would negotiate, use reason instead of bullets. They want me to retaliate, he said. They want me angry. That's when I'm weakest. We'll use patience instead. When the others left, Arya remained behind. You're risking everything, she said quietly. He looked at her, eyes shadowed but steady. Matteo once told me something, he said. He said mercy isn't the opposite of strength. It's the proof of it. I didn't believe him then. I do now. She stepped closer, the distance between them filled with silence that spoke louder than any words. You'll find him, she said softly. And when you do, don't let this world pull you back into what it wants you to be. Be who you're meant to be. He gave a single nod. If I fall, promise me you'll leave this place. I'm not leaving, she said firmly. Not until you both come back. Outside, the wind began to rise again, whispering through the trees, carrying the scent of rain. It felt like the beginning of another storm, but this time Arya wasn't afraid. She had walked through one before and found purpose inside it. As she stood by the window watching Luca's men prepare, she realized that life had an odd way of testing hearts, throwing people into chaos not to destroy them, but to reveal what they were truly made of. And in that moment, she knew that whatever happened next, she was no longer just the woman who saved a stranger in the rain. She was part of something larger, a story of redemption, of courage, of love that had yet to speak its name, but pulsed quietly beneath every heartbeat. As midnight drew near, Luca stood in the courtyard, the lights of the city flickering far below the hills. The rain began to fall again, gentle but steady, and he tilted his head upward for a moment, letting it wash over his face. He remembered the night she had pulled Matteo from death's grasp, the way her hands had been covered in blood, but her eyes had held no fear. That same rain now whispered its promise again, that sometimes salvation arrives in the unlikeliest of moments, wearing the face of a stranger who refuses to look away. When Arya stepped out to join him, he didn't speak. She stood beside him silently, the two of them looking out into the storm that had once brought them together. And though neither said the words aloud, both understood the truth carried on the wind. That trust, once broken, could still be rebuilt, and that even in a world ruled by power, compassion remained the strongest force of all. The redemption of rain. The night of reckoning came quietly, without thunder or warning. It began like every other night, with the air heavy and the horizon painted in the dull orange of city lights smudged by mist. But inside the mansion, the stillness was deceptive. Every corridor pulsed with tension. Every shadow seemed to breathe. Arya could feel it in her bones, that quiet tremor before everything changes. Luca's men moved like ghosts, their voices low, their faces unreadable. Plans had been made, alliances tested, and now everything came down to this one night. The night Luca would walk into enemy ground not to destroy, but to bring back the last piece of his heart. Arya stood by the window watching the rain begin to fall again, the same rain that had started it all. It wasn't a storm this time, just a soft, steady drizzle that whispered against the glass, like the sky remembering her story. She pressed her hand to the cold pane and thought about how much had changed. When she had dragged a bleeding stranger through her door, she hadn't known that she was pulling in a fate larger than her own. She hadn't known that compassion could rewrite destinies, or that courage could be as quiet as refusing to walk away. Behind her, the faint sound of footsteps made her turn, and Luca appeared in the doorway dressed in black. His expression carved from resolve and something deeper, acceptance. "You shouldn't be awake," he said gently, though his eyes betrayed exhaustion. "I couldn't sleep," she replied, her voice soft but steady. "You're leaving, aren't you?" He didn't deny it. "Matteo's alive. They sent a message, an address. They want me to come alone." The words hung heavy between them. "It's a trap," she said. "You know that?" He nodded once. "Probably. But I can't ignore it." He walked to the table where his gloves lay, picked them up, and looked at her again. "You once said that fear builds walls," he said. "You were right. I've lived my whole life behind one. Tonight I break it." She moved closer, her chest tight, her heart battling between hope and dread. "You don't have to do this alone," she whispered. He gave a faint smile, the kind that carried more sadness than joy. "I do, because the man I was would have sent an army. The man I'm trying to become goes himself." His gaze softened. "If I don't come back—" "Don't say that," she interrupted, her voice trembling. "You will." He didn't argue, but his silence said everything. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his touch brief, reverent, as though afraid that contact itself would leave a scar. "You changed everything, Arya," he said quietly. "Whatever happens tonight, don't ever think it was for nothing." And with that, he turned and walked out into the rain. The house felt hollow after he left. Every sound seemed louder, the tick of the clock, the drip of water from the ceiling, the distant rumble of thunder returning. Arya couldn't sit still. She paced the floor, her mind a storm of its own. Mateo's face flashed in her thoughts, pale and weak but smiling, and Luca's voice echoed like an unspoken promise. "You'll be safe." But safety meant nothing when the people you cared about walked willingly into danger. After what felt like hours, she made her decision. She couldn't wait in silence. She wouldn't be another ghost in his story. She grabbed her coat, stepped into the night, and followed the rain. The city stretched before her like a wounded beast, wet streets gleaming under dim streetlights, alleys whispering with secrets. She knew where he'd gone. She had heard the address when he told his men, an abandoned warehouse near the docks, where the river met the sea. A place where deals and betrayals had shared the same walls for years. The taxi driver tried to warn her, said no one went there after dark, but she said nothing, only stared ahead as the raindrops traced paths down the window like tears she refused to shed. When she arrived, the place was exactly as she had imagined. Broken windows, rusted gates, the scent of salt and decay hanging heavy in the air. The rain had grown heavier, drumming against the corrugated roof in rhythmic defiance. She moved cautiously through the shadows, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. And then she saw them. Dark figures inside the open space, voices echoing off the walls. Luca stood at the center, unarmed, surrounded by men whose faces she couldn't see but whose intentions were clear. "Where is he?" Luca's voice carried through the hollow air, calm but commanding. A man stepped forward, tall and broad, his tone oily with amusement. "You always were predictable, Luca. Come alone, like the noble fool you pretend to be." He gestured to the side, and Mateo was shoved into view, bruised, restrained, but alive. Relief flickered across Luca's face for a fraction of a second before turning to focus. "Let him go," he said evenly. "You have what you wanted in me." "Not yet," the man replied. "You've been soft lately, trying to make peace, talk deals. You forgot what business you're in. So, here's the choice. Walk away and watch your brother die. Or remind this city who you really are." Arya's heart clenched as she watched from behind a stack of crates, rain dripping down her hair, her breath shallow. She could see Luca's eyes, steady, unflinching, burning with that quiet fire that had drawn her to him from the start. "I don't need to remind anyone," he said, "because I'm done being the man who only knows how to destroy." The other man laughed, cold and mocking. "Then you die with your ideals." He raised his hand, signaling his men. The moment stretched, one heartbeat, two, and then chaos erupted. The air filled with shouts, the crash of movement, the echo of struggle. Arya ducked instinctively as figures collided, her vision blurring through the downpour. She wanted to run, to scream, to stop him, but her body refused to move. She watched Luca fight, not like a man defending power, but like someone protecting a truth he refused to surrender. In the confusion, Mateo broke free, crawling toward safety. Arya rushed forward, helping him up, her arm under his as they stumbled toward the exit. "He's still in there!" Mateo gasped, trying to turn back, but she held him tight. He told me not to let you die, she whispered fiercely. A sudden explosion of sound behind them made her flinch, a sharp crack, the echo of finality. She turned, her breath frozen. The fight had ended. The warehouse was silent except for the steady drum of rain. Through the haze, she saw Luca standing still, his dark silhouette framed against the faint light filtering through the roof. The man who had threatened him lay motionless at his feet. For a long moment, Luca didn't move. Then, slowly, he turned toward them, his expression unreadable, his face streaked with rain and shadow. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost weary. "It's over." They left the warehouse together, the three of them walking into the rain like survivors of a war no one would write about. Matteo leaned heavily on Aria, but his eyes never left his brother. "You saved me again," he said quietly. Luca shook his head. "No, she did. She saved both of us." The drive back to the estate was silent. None of them spoke, but the air between them was filled with unspoken truths. When they reached the mansion, the sky was already breaking open with dawn, streaks of pale light cutting through the clouds. The rain had finally stopped. Aria stepped out of the car and stood in the courtyard, the wet stones gleaming under the morning sun. For the first time since that first storm, the world felt still. Luca joined her, his expression softer than she had ever seen it. "You could have stayed safe," he said quietly. "Why did you come?" She looked at him, her eyes steady. "Because you once told me that kindness makes people vulnerable." "I think you were wrong." "Kindness makes people strong enough to walk into storms for others." He smiled then. A real smile, rare and deep, the kind that reaches the eyes. "You've been teaching me that since the day you opened your door." He paused, glancing toward Matteo resting against the car. "I spent years building a world from fear. Maybe it's time to build one from trust." Aria stepped closer, her voice low but firm. "Then start with yourself. You don't have to carry everything alone." He looked at her, and something in his gaze shifted. The armor of years finally cracking to reveal the man beneath, the one she had always glimpsed in moments of silence. "Maybe I don't," he said softly. The weeks that followed became a new chapter for all of them. Luca began dismantling the empire his father had built, piece by piece, turning it into something cleaner, safer, a network that helped instead of harmed, that protected instead of controlled. Many resisted, some left, but those who stayed followed him not out of fear but respect. Matteo recovered fully, often teasing that Aria had become the true boss of the house, her quiet strength more commanding than any weapon. And Aria, though she never sought recognition, became the heartbeat of their new beginning. Her kindness spread through the walls like light seeping through cracks in old stone, soft but unstoppable. One evening months later, as the sun dipped low and the gardens glowed with golden light, Luca found her sitting by the fountain, her reflection rippling in the water. "The rain hasn't come back," she said without turning. "Maybe it's finally over." He stood beside her, his hands in his pockets, the wind brushing through his hair. "Or maybe it's waiting for the next person who needs saving," he replied quietly. She smiled, her gaze meeting his. "You really believe that?" "I believe in what it brings," he said. "You for one." They sat in silence for a long time, the kind of silence that doesn't need words to fill it. Somewhere in the distance, thunder murmured faintly, not a threat, but a reminder. The rain would always return, as it always does, but this time they were ready for it, because storms no longer meant fear. They meant renewal. As twilight deepened, Luca reached out, his hand brushing hers. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." Aria looked at him, her eyes shining with the reflection of fading light. "Don't thank me," she whispered. "Thank the rain. It brought you to my door." And as the first drops began to fall once more, soft and warm against the skin, Luca tilted his face to the sky and let the rain wash over him, not as a symbol of grief or guilt, but as a cleansing of the past. Aria laughed softly beside him, her voice carrying through the air like music. And for the first time, he realized that some storms don't come to break you. They come to remind you that even in the darkest nights, compassion can rewrite fate, and love, in its quiet, unassuming form, can rebuild even the most broken of worlds. The mansion lights flickered to life behind them, the rain shimmering under their glow, and somewhere within that sound, the rhythm of drops on stone, was the echo of a promise kept. The storm that had once brought fear had now given birth to peace, and the strangers who had met beneath its fury stood together not as rescuer and saved, but as two souls who had learned the truest lesson of all, that sometimes to save another is to save yourself.